Hello.
Welcome to Table Talk with Tom and Chester. And today is our 14th episode. And today we're talking about principles again. This is part 2 of principles. Actually, we're talking about recognizing the principles.
Yeah.
And things.
Recognizing principles. And we'll having 3 guests today. We're going to have Molly Christensen, Nicholeen Peck, and Becky Rogers telling about their definition of what a principle is and how they implement them into their lives and in their homeschooling. So cool. Day 2 on principles. I love principles. And we're going to be talking a lot about the hierarchy of principles today also within our discussion. So let's start out with Molly Christensen.
Okay.
So Molly is a longtime homeschooler, and she's been doing homeschooling for, I don't even know how long, over 20 years. And she is also got several books out there too about homeschooling and stuff and programs. And she talks about principles of order quite a bit in her thing. In fact, we have a whole section on her principles of order. But this is what she says about principles. So let's hear from Molly.
Good. Yeah. All right. So principles we talked about, and you know principles quite well. Mm-hmm. How do you implement and use principles in your homeschooling?
Yeah, I love principles.
Yeah, and I love your definitions of principles.
Talking about, that we're searching for truths and what patterns we can see that match up with God's law.
Yeah.
I always try to incorporate principles in everything that I'm doing, and I a lot of times just have to ask myself first, what is the principle here? You know, and this is secular knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But is it really?
Yeah.
And so, for example, like if I'm teaching my kids about time management, I'm also going to bring them in the principles of time. And the way I can do this in an orderly fashion is that I've created a curriculum. And that I did that so that I could do this in an orderly fashion, so I could make sure that I was covering things, but it's also in a very simple fashion as well.
Yeah, and it covers it just covers basic principles. Is that how you start, or how do you start with your curriculum in principles?
We start from it's history based, and so we start.
Beautiful.
We just go through history, and so like for time, we talk about what is time even? Where did it even start? Well, why did people start measuring time?
Yeah.
You know, and did they get it right when they first started measuring it? They didn't, because they didn't know the principles yet.
Yeah.
But we have the benefit of all these people ahead of us having figured this out.
And finding the principles themselves. Yeah, beautiful.
And so we just go through it in a historical sort of way, but we pull in some of these, different leadership and success principles as well, because if we're going to talk about the history of time, let's learn how to manage time too.
Right, yeah.
Which you really can't. You can only manage yourself and how you use time.
Yes,
but
that's true. That's true.
And that's one of the principles.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome, that's great.
So she's very clear on the types of things you can have principles. You need to follow principles. But, okay. What I'm trying to say, it's boggled in my mind, is the way I love what she said at the very end. She said, the principles of time and how we can manage time. Well, we can't really manage time. We can only manage ourselves with time. And that's reality when it comes to principles.
That's true.
Because they are eternal, we can only manage ourselves with the principles.
Yeah.
We can't manage the principle because it's
eternal.
Law.
It's forever. It's not going to change. Yeah, you can't manage it.
It's like trying to, and I know it's an overused example, but it's like trying to manage gravity. We can't change gravity, but we can change how we use gravity to our own benefits.
Right, and we can learn with those principles, with correct principles, we can learn to fly.
Or to get water off a mountain.
Yeah.
To come to what we need.
Yeah.
Or to get water to a whole city by putting it up in a water tower, and have it go down through the whole city.
Exactly.
I mean, so we can but we're not managing gravity. We're managing ourselves and our projects with that.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with any principle. So.
Yeah, and that's important to know about principles, is that we can't manage them. We manage ourselves around them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Molly. All right, so Tom has this quotation he's going to talk about with Elder Richard G. Scott, and this is one of the most popularly used quotations about principles right now that I have seen in many instances, actually. So, Richard G. Scott.
Okay. So he says, I'm trying to find it. There it is. As you seek spiritual knowledge, search for principles. Carefully separate them from the detail used to explain them. For example, in your scripture studies, there's beautiful stories. We've talked about this before. There's lots of stories. That's how God chooses to ingrain in us the principles, but we don't even necessarily realize it unless we separate the principles from the actual story. And then he says, super important, principles are concentrated truth packaged for application to a wide variety of circumstances.
Never heard that?
I've heard it a couple times.
Several times. That's the part that's most quoted.
Yeah. Principles are concentrated truth packaged for application to a wide variety of circumstances because they are eternal. You can use them in various circumstances. Mm-hmm. A true principle makes decisions clear even under the most confusing and compelling circumstances. It is worth great effort to organize the truth we gather to simple statements of principle. So she's saying it's worth the effort.
Yeah, it is worth the effort. Worth the effort. Well, to separate them, right? To check them out is in small packages that lead to application, and then also to put them into a small statement to be able to utilize. Yeah. All right. So up next we have Nicholeen Peck. And she puts a whole other kind of twist on principles for me. I had to think and ponder on this one for a minute. So, Nicholeen, what does the word principle mean to you? What is your definition?
Well, principle actually means an eternal truth, So if something is a principle, it's a self-evident truth that once found will be transformational to you. It will help you become a better person if you find the principle, because you'll either be able to avoid danger or you'll be able to find purpose. That's what I would say.
Okay. And how do you use that?
How do I use principle?
Yeah.
Like everything is principle for me. Okay. So they made a show about me called The World's Strictest Parent. That means a person who governs themselves by a set of principles. So that doesn't mean I'm perfect, but that's my goal every day.
Good.
Every day, the principles. So, I guess that's a simple way to say it. Everything we do, we point back to the principles in our family. You have to understand the precepts. There should be precepts in everything, in your math, in your science, in your everything. And you know what? You shouldn't wait till they're old to teach the precepts. People think the kids aren't ready for the
meat kind of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they are.
They think that they're not ready and that they have to wait until they're older. Oh, they can't read the scriptures yet, so I'm not going to bring it into whatever it is. No.
Yeah.
You've got to start when they're really teeny tiny. Precept, precept, precept. Philosophy, philosophy, philosophy. If you don't train them in your principles, society will.
Yeah.
Everyone gets trained in someone else's principles.
Yeah.
That goes back to agency, right? Agency meaning choosing who you will follow.
Yeah. All right. So Nicholeen there. So the thing that I was really impressed with is when she says, when truths are found, she says they are transformational. When they're found, they have to be searched for.
Yep.
They're not something that, and like last time or last week that we discussed it, they have to be discovered, not invented. Yep. You can't invent a principle. It's already there. It's already put in place. It's already a law of God. And when they're discovered, then they're transformational. It's really cool.
And I think, if it's a principle, if you've made it up, if someone's made it up, then you need to dig deeper to find the actual principle. Mm-hmm. And you may find out that, they really didn't make it up. It was real.
Yeah.
But that's how you can test whether part of your testing steps, I would say, is to check and see, is it something that you can just make up or if it's real?
Right. I think that's
it's not the whole thing, but it's one of the steps.
No, that's good. I think that's a good check, right?
Right.
To see which ones. Yeah, that's really good. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Nicholeen. All right. So up next, we're going to do a training on what is a principle. Last week we talked why it's important for us to learn principles, and today we're going to talk about what is a principle. So, but before we talk about what is a principle, we need to know the difference. And are you sharing that right now? Are you going to?
No,
Okay.
I'm just getting ready to.
All right. You can go ahead and we can just
All right.
talk through that. So we have a picture here for you that's just a kind of build off of last week. So last week we talked about concepts, which is a group of things, procedure, which is a list of things or activities to do it, and then principles, which are discovered and not invented. These two are invented, and then this is things. And we talked about how they all need to work together. So, but we need to know the difference between principles now. We have higher principles and regular principles. So I just went through a couple definitions of what the founding fathers, and then before the founding fathers, the people that found the founding fathers,
The books that they read.
So yeah. So Cicero called them natural laws and first principles. In the Constitution, we call them inalienable rights or the laws of nature. Other people have called them higher laws. In the church, we call them doctrine. So these are the ones that go way up here. Okay, these are the ones that are higher than these lower ones. So for instance, that man has, inalienable rights. That's a higher law, right? That we have the right to be free, to have the pursuit of happiness. Those are those higher laws that we have been, that we follow. Then the lower laws would be lower laws like laws of physics or laws of can't be in the same place at the same time. Things like that. They're still true, that are not invented, but that are lower than the higher laws that we have, these inalienable rights. And what was really cool is that when Cleon Skousen was writing his book, The 5,000-Year Leap, he said this about finding them. He says, these are absolute realities. It is basic in its principles and comprehensible to human mind and totally correct and morally right in the general operations. He summarized them by saying the first principles or natural laws used by the founding fathers, they believed that these truths were monumental discoveries. Isn't that beautiful?
I think we need to look at them as
monumental
discoveries as well.
I think so.
Because when we look at it that way, we see their importance. Mm-hmm. And then we can start pulling them out and using them. And as Nicholeen said, we can govern ourselves with those principles.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
If we don't look at them as monumental discoveries, then they're just not that important to us.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. And when we do discover them, and I think that's what makes them so beautiful, is principles are discovered. So when we finally discover them, we're like, oh, yay, this is true. And then when we share it, it rings true with everybody.
I think that's what happens when you actually study to find them, mm-hmm. as opposed to just reading a list of what they are. Mm-hmm. If we're looking at a situation and let's go back to the cookies. We're having trouble with the timing for those no-bake cookies, so that when the timing that they're on the stove, if they're too short, they won't work. They'll be mushy. If they're right on, or whatever you want to call it, sticky. If they're right on time, they'll be perfect. And if they're cooked too long,
or
they're
too
crumbly,
hot. Mm-hmm.
or too hot.
Yeah.
But you don't know that that's really the hot part. And so, as you look at it and you try different things and you go in and you discover that principle, now it's a monumental discovery.
Yeah.
Because you worked at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can apply it to other things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
that's what I like about that.
Yeah, cooking has lots of great principles you can discover. Yep. All right, so that's the difference between the hierarchy there. Now, what also that principles has, it's not just a hierarchy this direction, right? But there are two types of principles. The first type is called causal principles. Causal principles are principles that deal with change. So they can be, it's a cause and effect. This happens, then this will happen. It's, it leads to a consequence. Also it's an if-then statement. You can usually put these causal principles into an if-then statement. So, for instance, let's give a Book of Mormon one. If you obey my commandments, you will prosper in the land. That's a causal principle. Then we also have sequential principles. Well, sequential principles are follow a certain pattern or a certain line. And a sequential can either be cylindrical, where they have no beginning and end, and they just keep repeating, or they can be linear, which they do have a beginning and an end. And so some of these could be seeds that grow. A plant, that would be a cylindrical principle. So you have a seed, the water cycle. Yeah. You have any of those. And then an example of a linear one would be the timeline of a history. We have the beginning of history, then we have the flood, and then we have this, right? It just keeps going down the line. And so that's a sequential principle, a linear sequential principle. But they're all, of course, still discovered, not invented, and they are all, and you can have higher laws and lower laws in both of these cases. So you have two types of principles. All right, so the last thing I wanted to just touch on is the characteristics of a principle. There are lots of characteristics of a principle, but they're true for all types of them.
Okay, on the thing, but there's a lot, a whole nice long list.
And this is just a list that I've collected.
Right, it's not even full,
and I don't even know if it's complete. Yeah, I'm sure that you guys can add some more to it, but it's a lot. I'll just read some of them. Principles are fundamental, unchanging truths that lead to action. It's an absolute truth that reduces to its most basic form. It's a relationship between two or more changes to be discovered, not invented. We talked about that in great detail last week. It's timeless, based on human nature and not on cultural or customs.
That one's important.
Yeah, it's endless. In other words, more can always be discovered. That's why I said I can never know if this is complete, right? I don't know if that's complete, because there's always going to be more.
I like this one right here. They're simple, they're clear, succinct, and complete. That whole thing you're saying is that they're statements of truth. It's like the can't be in two places at once, or wickedness never was happiness. It's very clear. It's very simple. Mm-hmm. If it's complicated, you got to do more digging.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
To find the simplicity.
It's like elements, right? We say find this molecule, and we say, oh yeah, it's the smallest bit. Oh, wait a minute, it has even smaller elements to it. Yeah. An element can't be broken up into smaller pieces, but a molecule can. So a principle is like an element. And then I also love that it is personally relevant. All principles, whether they apply to the whole world or just to me, they're all personally relevant to me, right? And when we discover them, they can be transformational.
That's cool.
Awesome. All right. So that is what a principle is. So now you know that. You know that they have hierarchies, and you know that there are different types, and you know that there have many, many characteristics. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Who's up next?
We have Becky Rogers.
Yeah. So what is your definition of a principle?
So I think a principle is a truth that you can use to guide other decisions that you make.
Okay. So do you use principles in your homeschooling? In your life?
We use them all the time. We use principles all the time.
Yeah.
Because you can't possibly have a rule for everything. And if you don't have principles, then how are you going to self-govern?
Yeah.
How are you going to make any decisions if you don't know the principles by which those are made?
Yeah.
True principles. Mm-hmm. Principles have to be true.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Otherwise they're not going to be of use.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the 1828 dictionary calls it a general truth. A principle is a general truth.
That's
that
awesome.
Can be true not just here, but it could be, it's the same truth as the same principle in Noah's time, right? It's just a truth that's always...
Yeah, and I'm thinking that principles are simple.
Yeah. They don't have to be, which is funny because that definition is so simple.
Right, exactly.
General truth.
Yep, that's it.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when we were young and our family was young, trying to figure out parenting and all these, like I used to get all the parenting magazines, all of that, and try to, which makes it complicated.
Oh yeah.
And confusing.
Yeah, you have to.
Until I figured out that most of those people writing those articles didn't have any kids. So then I canceled my subscription.
That can go out the window.
but at that same time, I would notice like people would have their family rule chart, like a big page of rules up on the thing, and then we used to have some friends. They were kind of unconventional, and he just had one rule, and it just said, "Don't tick off the dad." So not that that's a great, but that idea of the principle, like we don't have to tell you everything you can and can't do. Just don't do anything that's going to get in the way of unity and family harmony.
Yeah. And then you can think of a whole bunch of ways that
right.
That's
the principle.
Right?
That's the principle. Don't tick off dad. We don't have to tell you all the things to not do to tick off dad. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
You can think this through, right?
Yeah. That's actually Eastern thinking.
Yeah.
Instead of giving that choice to them and making them think about it. Anytime you give your opportunity to your children to think, then then it's the Eastern way of parenting. Yeah.
Yes.
So you're doing it right. Yeah. Great.
I just don't want to have to work that hard. So principles are easier.
Oh yeah, principles are a lot easier. And principles are fun because in the scriptures, it's just like wickedness never was happiness.
Yep.
That's the truth, no matter when it is, right?
Yep.
And it's a simple statement.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Very
awesome.
cool.
All right. Wickedness never was happiness.
It's coming up.
Yep. I loved her point in there about the Eastern thinking, right? Is that you just have to lay the principle down and then it will happen, right? Then they can choose, like, is this going to be against that principle or against that rule or against that law? And yeah, I just thinking of Joseph Smith. I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves. How true is that? My gosh, it's so true. Is that we can govern ourselves once we know the correct principles. And we can just have to, in family laws, we only have to make a few laws and a few rules in our family, and they can govern themselves. They can govern their own actions against that.
If we use teaching principles as the way to do it. I thought it was interesting because when we first started studying principles more in depth, I kept thinking, man, this is not that easy. It takes quite a bit of effort to do this. But what was fascinating was that Becky actually said, I don't want to work that hard, so I just teach them the principles. But she's right.
Yeah.
Because
once you find them.
It takes time to find the principle.
Yeah.
But if I find the principle, I can use it over and over and over again, and use it to I can teach it over and over again, simply, and I don't have to try to give the rules and the laws for every little step along the way.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. All right. So that was Becky Rogers, and that concludes the day. Unless we have a tip or something else that you want to add in there.
I don't. We're good.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I would like to conclude with a quotation here. This was taken from a. Hold on. Let me see what it is. It was a magazine. I mean, not a magazine. A manual for marriage. It's called Eternal Marriage, and it was written in a manual. And it says, a principle is an enduring truth, law, or rule that you can adopt to guide you in making your decisions. Principles help us apply the doctrine of the gospel to everyday living. They give us light to illuminate the path before us in an increasingly confused and a wicked world. Isn't that beautiful? To illuminate the path.
Well, I think that's why they're so important. That's why we need to look at principles as a monumental discovery.
Yeah.
Because there are so many confusing, well-meaning, people coming with, oh, we need to do this, or we need to do that, or we need to allow this, or we need to allow that. From a well-meaning point of wanting to include people or help people or something like that. But because if we don't do it with true principles, if we don't include those true principles in there, we're off in somewhere else and we don't know how to get back.
Yeah.
We don't know how to help ourselves or our families or our friends or our responsibilities with church or whatnot.
Right. That's true. And we need to get back to those simple truths that will lead us in the right direction, right? They're not fallacies and like, oh, they sound good. They appeal to your emotions and you're like, well, I think this must be true. And then you believe that when it's really a fallacy.
Right. And so that's why it's so important to find to do the digging, take the effort.
Yeah.
The first time to find that principle.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. All right, so let's use principles that illuminate our paths through this confusing world. Thanks for being with us.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, click here. To choose from our gifts and request updates on our most popular topics, visit calledtolearn.com. For more videos like this one, click this playlist. For homeschool stories, click this playlist here.